The lights were still on in my $15 million house. I could see them from the highway. Blazing. Golden. Proud. She was throwing a party in there. Laughing. Pouring champagne into crystal glasses I had bought. Dancing on marble floors I had laid. Celebrating the life she had stolen from me. And I was sitting in a rusted old truck. In the dark. Watching. Most people would call that losing. I called it waiting. My name is Harrison Clark. For 40 years, I built skyscrapers, reshaped skylines, and turned empty land into empires. I knew one thing better than anyone alive. The most important part of any structure is never what you can see. It is never the glass, the marble, the grand staircase. It is always the ground beneath your feet. My wife took the house. She took the cars. She took $7 million. And she left our 16-year-old son behind like he was a piece of furniture that didn't match her new life. She thought she had stripped me bare. She had no idea she was standing on a trapdoor. And in exactly 53 minutes, I was going to open it. It started on a Tuesday morning. The kind of Tuesday that looks perfectly normal from the outside blue sky. Ocean breeze. The smell of coffee in the air but feels wrong in your bones before you even open your eyes. I was sitting in the breakfast nook, buttering a piece of toast, watching the Pacific stretch out to the horizon like a sheet of gray silk. 40 years of building this life. 40 years of concrete and glass and early mornings and late nights. And now, at 70 years old, all I wanted was this: the ocean, the quiet, the coffee. I never heard her coming. The envelope hit my plate like a hammer. Porcelain cracked. Coffee exploded across the Italian silk tablecloth, spreading dark and slow like a bruise blooming in real time. I didn't jump. I didn't shout. In 40 years of high-stakes negotiations, I had learned one unbreakable rule: panic is the first sign of weakness. So I picked up my linen napkin, and I began to dab at the stain. Slowly, calmly, and I looked up. Veronica was standing on the other side of the table, 48 years old, beautiful in that sharp, expensive, manufactured way that costs $10,000 a month to maintain. She was wearing tennis whites she hadn't earned, hiding her eyes behind oversized designer sunglasses, arms crossed like a woman who had already decided the outcome of a conversation that hadn't started yet. She didn't apologize for the mess. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just looked at me and said, "Harrison, I'm done. I want a divorce." I set the napkin down. I had felt this coming for months. The late nights, the whispered phone calls, the way she pulled her hand back every time mine reached for it. But hearing it out loud still felt like a door slamming shut on everything I thought I had built. I asked her what she wanted. She smiled. That smile, the one that never touched her eyes. "Everything," she said. "The Malibu house, the Tribeca penthouse, the Porsche collection, and $5 million in cash. I had my lawyers draft it last night. It's all in the envelope." I looked at the stain on the tablecloth. It had stopped spreading. I did the math quietly, the way I always do. The house alone was worth $15 million. The penthouse, another 10. The cars, priceless. She was asking for nearly 80% of everything I had built. She wasn't asking to be taken care of. She was asking to be handed a kingdom. Most men would have exploded. I just asked her one question. "What about Leo?" Leo, our 16-year-old son, a quiet boy. Sensitive. The kind of kid who reads books on the beach and plays piano at midnight when he thinks no one is listening. He had my eyes and, unfortunately, his mother's tendency to love people who don't quite deserve it, including her. Veronica sighed. It was the kind of sigh you make when someone asks you to take out the trash. That's the other thing. "Harrison," she said, picking a piece of invisible lint off her pristine white skirt. You keep the boy." The air left the room. I asked her to repeat herself. Slowly, because I needed to be sure I had heard what I thought I heard. She shrugged. "Leo is 16. He's practically an adult. He's moody. He's socially awkward. He drags me down. I'm starting a new chapter, a vibrant, exciting chapter, and I cannot be dragging a brooding teenager through it. He's too much like you. Harrison, he's heavy." That was the moment I felt it. Not heartbreak, not rage, something colder than both. The sliding glass door behind her opened, and there he was, Leo, standing in the doorway in his oversized headphones, holding a book. His face, the color of chalk. He had heard every single word. He stood completely still, the way a person stands when their body hasn't yet told their mind what to do with pain that size. He looked at her, waiting for her to laugh and say she was joking, waiting for her to step forward and pull him in, waiting for his mother to be his mother. Just one more time, Veronica turned and saw him. For one fraction of a second, one single heartbeat, I thought she might soften. I thought some buried instinct might kick in, some thread of the woman she used to be, or the woman she pretended to be when we married, might pull her back from the edge. It didn't. She looked at our son the way you look, at a forecasted rain on a day you plan to wear white. "Don't look at me like that, Leo," she said, her voice flat and unbothered. "You'll be fine. Your father has money. He'll hire people. I've done my time." Leo's book hit the deck. The sound was hollow, small, final. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just looked at me, his eyes full of something no child should ever have to feel, and then he turned and ran, down the steps, across the sand, disappearing behind the dunes, like he was trying to outrun the words still hanging in the air. I stood up, and for the first time in 20 years, the mask slipped. I looked at Veronica, truly looked at her, and I saw her clearly. Not a wife, not a partner, not even a mother. A woman who had just looked her child in the eyes and chosen the penthouse. She checked her diamond watch, the one I bought her for our 5th anniversary. "I have a brunch appointment," she said, adjusting her bag. "Have your lawyers call mine. Let's make this quick." She walked out. She didn't look back at the beach where her son was crying. She just walked out into the California sunshine, heels clicking on marble, thinking she had already won. She had no idea she had just made the worst mistake of her life. I didn't call a therapist. I didn't call a friend. I didn't pour myself a drink or sit in the dark and cry into my hands like a man who has lost everything. I had tried all of those things the first time my life fell apart 25 years ago. In a different house, with a different woman, and none of them had worked. So this time, I picked up the phone and called Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was not the kind of lawyer who sent fruit baskets and wore soft colors to put clients at ease. She was the kind of lawyer opposing counsel had nightmares about, the kind who read the fine print before she read the headline. In legal circles, they called her the Iron Maiden. In my circle, she was simply the only person I trusted with a secret. She answered on the first ring. "Harrison, good morning." I spoke quietly, precisely, the way you speak, when every word costs something. "Sarah, Veronica wants a divorce. She wants the Malibu house, the Tribeca penthouse, the Porsche collection, and $5 million in cash. I need you to prepare the settlement agreement." A pause. "Harrison, we will fight her. We will bury her. She will not see a dime of give her everything she asked for." I said. Dead silence. "I beg your pardon, draft the agreement exactly as she wants it. Every property, every car, every dollar." "Harrison," Sarah said slowly, as if she were speaking to someone standing on a ledge. "Have you lost your mind?" I looked out the window toward the beach. I could still see Leo's silhouette. small and hunched on a piece of driftwood, his shoulders shaking. She called him a burden. "Sarah," I said. She told him she was done being his mother. She said it to his face. And then she went to book a manicure. The silence that followed was different, heavier. "My God," Sarah whispered. "Give her everything." I repeated, "But add one clause, non-negotiable. She signs a full and irrevocable waiver of all parental rights. Total severance from Leo, from his life, his future, his name. She wants freedom, the none. I am going to give her so much freedom," she chokes on it. "Harrison, even if she signs that giving her the properties is financial suicide, she wins." I watched Leo drag his feet through the sand, small and lost against the wide gray ocean. "Does she?" I said. And then I told Sarah about the Phoenix Trust. 25 years ago, after my first marriage collapsed and took half of everything I had built, I made a decision that most people would have called paranoid. My attorney at the time called it excessive. My accountant called it unnecessary. I called it a foundation. Because here is what 40 years in real estate teaches you: the most dangerous thing a man can do is confuse what he owns with what he controls. Anyone can take a building from you. Banks do it. Ex-wives do it. Markets do it. But no one can take the ground. If the ground was never yours to lose in the first place. So in 1998, I did something unusual, something that was common in commercial real estate skyscrapers, shopping centers, mobile home parks, but almost unheard of in a private residence. I separated the land from the house. I transferred the physical earth, the sand, the bedrock, the actual parcel of land beneath the Malibu estate, and the footprint of the Tribeca building into an irrevocable trust. A trust I named the Leo Clark Future Trust. Established years before Leo was even born. Waiting for the son I hoped I would one day have. My personal holding company, which owned the structures, the glass and marble and wood, then signed a 25-year ground lease with the trust. Monthly rent, paid internally. Tax obligations assigned to the tenant. Standard commercial terms. But buried on page 47, Section C, paragraph 4, a single clause. Small, quiet, patient as a sleeping landmine. It stated that if the physical structure was ever transferred to any party who was not a direct blood descendant of Harrison Clark, the ground lease would not transfer with it. It would terminate automatically at midnight on the date of transfer, not in 25 years. That night, Veronica had just signed for a mansion. She had no idea the mansion was a tent, and she had no idea the campground belonged to our son, Harrison. Sarah breathed when I finished explaining. Her voice had shifted completely, the frustration gone, replaced by something between disbelief and pure, electric awe. That is diabolical. It is a ground lease termination clause. I said, standard commercial language. The tax implications alone will destroy her. I know. She will owe back rent, penalties. She'll be bankrupt within 30 days. I know. Sarah, a long pause. You built this 25 years ago. She said quietly. Before Leo was born. Before Veronica. You built this. Just in case. I looked at the safe in the corner of my study. Inside it, a manila folder, soft at the edges from age, labeled in my own handwriting, Project Phoenix. 1998. In real estate, I said, you never build on ground. You don't control. I heard Sarah exhale slowly. I'll have the papers ready by tonight. She said, and Harrison, I want it on record that you are a terrifying human being. Not yet, I said, reaching for the phone to dial one more number, but I'm about to be. I hung up. I dialed Arthur, my trustee. A quiet man with parchment skin, and 40 years of my secrets locked behind his eyes. He answered on the second ring. "Arthur," I said, "confirm the status of the Phoenix Trust. The ground leases for Malibu and New York." A pause. The sound of files being opened. The leases were established in 1998. Arthur said, 25-year term. They expire tomorrow, at midnight. Mr. Clark, do not renew them. I said, "Silence. Sir. If you don't renew, the trust must issue eviction notices. The structures on the land become the owner's liability. They will owe rent at current market rates or face seizure of..." "I know." "Arthur," I said, "prepare the notices. Serve them at 1 minute past midnight. And Arthur, as of this afternoon, the owner of the structures is Veronica Clark." A very long pause. "Send the bill to her," I said. I hung up the phone. Outside, the tide was going out, pulling everything with it. The way tides always do. But this time, I wasn't afraid of what it was taking, because I knew what it was leaving behind. The clock was ticking. She just couldn't hear it yet. The conference room at Sterling and Partners was designed to make you feel small. Everything in it was sharp and cold and expensive chrome fixtures, frosted glass walls, a table so long and pale it looked like a slab of ice. The kind of room where powerful people came to take things from people who had run out of fight. Richard Sterling had chosen it deliberately. He wanted me to feel the weight of what I was about to lose. He had no idea I had chosen to be here. I sat on one side of the table with Sarah. We had no stacks of files. No team of paralegals arranged like soldiers behind us. Just a single leather briefcase. A metal box. And 2 people who knew exactly how this was going to end. On the other side sat Veronica and Richard Sterling. Richard was a man built entirely for the performance of confidence. Catalog teeth, bottled tan, a suit that cost more than my first car. Worn with the grace of a man who had never actually earned anything inside it. He was flipping through the settlement agreement with the satisfied hum of someone counting winnings before the game is over. Veronica sat beside him, looking luminous. Rested. She was wearing cream silk and a smile she hadn't bothered to hide. She smelled of vanilla and new beginnings and the complete absence of regret. She looked like a woman who had already redecorated her future and was just waiting for the moving truck. She hadn't asked about Leo once. Not once. This all looks very much in order. "Harrison," Richard said, not bothering to look up from the papers. "You've agreed to the Malibu residence, the Tribeca property, the vehicles, the art collection. It's a remarkably generous offer." He paused, letting the word generous hang in the air like bait. Surprisingly generous. Given the circumstances, he looked up then, his eyes narrowing just slightly. He was searching for the catch. Predators always sense when the prey is too still. I gave him nothing. I sat with my hands folded on the table and the expression of a man who had simply run out of energy to fight. "I'm 70 years old. Richard," I said quietly, "I just want it to be over." He studied me for another moment. Then he leaned back, satisfied. "Well," he said, straightening his cuffs, "my client does feel there are a few outstanding matters." Sarah stiffened beside me. "We've given you everything," she said, her voice tight as a wire. "The real estate alone represents $25 million in assets. You are holding a full king's ransom and you want more," Richard smiled. "We want fairness," he said smoothly. "Harrison is a legend. He will rebuild. Veronica cannot. Therefore, we are adding 2 stipulations to the final agreement." He straightened the papers in front of him. "First, Harrison covers all legal fees for both parties." Sarah opened her mouth. Richard raised one finger. "And second, a lump sum spousal support buyout. $2 million. Cash. Wired to Veronica's personal account within 24 hours of signing. Sarah's hand slammed the table. That is extortion. She said, "Harrison, get up. We are walking out of this room right now." I didn't move. I was watching Veronica. Her eyes had changed the moment Richard said 2 million. They had gone bright and sharp and hungry, the same look she got in auction rooms when she spotted something she wanted. Her fingers tightened around her water glass. She was practically vibrating. She wasn't thinking about the house anymore. She was thinking about what $2 million looked like in a private account with her name on it. She was thinking about Paris, about freedom, about a life that didn't include a 70-year-old husband or a 16-year-old son. 2 million. I said softly. Yes. Richard confirmed, his confidence fully restored. 2 million. Or we don't sign today. We depose you. We audit your books going back 30 years. We make the next 18 months of your life a very expensive nightmare. I looked at Sarah. She was red-faced, furious, ready to burn the building down on my behalf. "Sit down." "Sarah," I said. "Harrison, don't you dare." "Sit down." She sat, her jaw tight, her eyes saying everything her voice couldn't in front of opposing counsel. I turned back to Richard. "I'll pay the legal fees," I said, "and I'll pay the 2 million. Veronica made a small sound involuntary. Delighted. Quickly swallowed. Richard clicked his pen open with the casual ease of a man accepting a surrender. "Excellent," he said. "Then I believe we have a deal." "Not yet," I said. The pen stopped. Richard looked up. "I have one condition," I said. "Just one." He exhaled slowly, the way people exhale when they think they're humoring someone. "Harrison, we are not renegotiating the property terms. It has nothing to do with the property," I said. I reached into my briefcase. I took out a single document, 4 pages. Clean white paper. Black text. No ornamentation. I placed it on the table and slid it across the glass toward Veronica. She looked down at it. "This is a waiver of parental rights," I said. "It states that you voluntarily and irrevocably terminate all legal and physical custody of Leo Clark. It states that you waive any right to make medical or educational decisions for him, now or in the future. And it states that you permanently waive any claim to his estate, his trust funds, or any assets held in his name." I let the silence hold for a moment. "You walk away completely. Veronica, you don't call him. You don't visit. You don't show up at his graduation or his wedding or any morning of his life going forward. You become a stranger. Legally. Permanently." The room was very quiet. Even Richard looked uncomfortable. There is a particular kind of silence that falls when something that should never be a transaction becomes one. Veronica stared at the document. "You want me to sign away my son?" she said slowly. "I want you to be honest." I said, "You told him he was a burden. You told him you were done. You told him to his face that he was too heavy to carry into your next chapter." I kept my voice level. "I'm just putting it in writing. You sign this, you get the 2 million. You don't sign it, the deal is off. We go to court, and I will spend every dollar I have left making sure you walk away with nothing." She looked at Richard. "Is it legal?" she asked. Richard shifted in his seat. "If signed voluntarily, yes. It's binding. But Veronica, the optics, I don't care about optics," she said. She looked back at the document. I watched her eyes move across the page, not reading it. Not really. She wasn't absorbing the language. She was doing arithmetic. $2 million on one side of a scale. A moody teenage boy she had already decided she didn't want on the other. The scale didn't take long to tip. She reached for the pen. She didn't pause. She didn't ask to read the fine print. She didn't ask if she could say goodbye. She pressed the tip of the pen to the signature line with the casual confidence of someone signing a dinner receipt, and she wrote her name, Veronica Clark, with a flourish. "There," she said, pushing the document back across the table. "He's your problem now. Where's my check?" I picked up the waiver. I checked the signature. I folded it once, carefully, and placed it in the breast pocket of my jacket, right next to my heart. It was the most valuable thing in the room, more valuable than the house, more valuable than the cars, more valuable than every dollar I had just signed away. "Sarah," I said, "give her the check." Sarah opened her folder. She slid the cashier's check across the glass with 2 fingers, the way you slide something across a table when you don't want your hand to touch the other side. Veronica snatched it. She stared at the zeros. Her face opened into a wide, brilliant, winning smile. She stood up, smoothed her silk skirt, and looked at me with the warmth of someone who has just gotten everything they came for. "No hard feelings, Harrison," she said. "It was just business." I looked at her one last time. The woman who had just sold her child for the price of a condo. The woman who had signed her name with a flourish, no trembling hand. No hesitation. No backward glance toward the boy sitting somewhere right now with headphones on, pretending the world wasn't falling apart. Just business. I agreed. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard the sound of Veronica already texting someone, the soft, rapid tap of a woman making plans. She walked out of that room thinking she had won the war. She had just handed me the weapon that would end it. The house looked like a crown on fire. Every window blazing. Every light burning at full power. Casting a golden glow so wide and bright, it pushed back the darkness of the Pacific Coast Highway and painted the ocean itself in shades of amber and champagne. From where I sat in my truck, a quarter mile down the road with the engine off and the windows down, it looked less like a home and more like a declaration. Look at what I have. Look at what I took. Look at what I won. I checked the dashboard clock. 11:52. 8 minutes. I had been sitting here for 2 hours. Not out of sentiment. I had no interest in watching Veronica enjoy her victory lap. I was here for the same reason. A surgeon stays in the building after an operation, to make sure everything goes exactly as planned. Inside, I knew precisely what was happening. I had lived in that house for 10 years. I knew the way sound moved through those glass walls. The way the bass from the speakers in the living room could be felt in the deck outside. The way the chandelier in the foyer threw light across the marble in long golden strips. She would be at the center of all of it. She was always at the center, wearing something white bridal, triumphant, aggressively innocent, holding a glass of vintage champagne I had likely paid for through the settlement, surrounded by her court, the women from the club who had whispered about me for years, the men who laughed at the right moments, the tennis instructor in a linen suit. She had bought him yesterday with my money. They would be toasting her. To Veronica. To freedom. To getting exactly what you deserve. I almost smiled at that last one. A pair of headlights swept across my windshield as a car turned into the estate's service entrance. Not a guest. Not a Katia. A gray sedan. Nondescript. The kind of car that exists specifically to be forgotten. It parked just outside the gate, and the engine went dark. Mr. Henderson had arrived. He was a process server Arthur had used for 20 years. A quiet, precise man who understood that his job was not to argue or explain or soften the blow. His job was to deliver, to confirm, and to leave. He was very good at all three. I watched him check his watch through the windshield. He wouldn't move yet. The law is exact. And so was he. 11:56. Inside the house. The party was peaking. I could feel the bass from where I sat. A low rhythmic pulse traveling up through the road and into the soles of my feet. Somewhere in that blazing house, Veronica was giving the tour the master bedroom, the ocean view from the upper balcony, the art collection she hadn't chosen and couldn't name. She was touching the marble countertops with proprietary hands, pointing out the floor-to-ceiling windows with the pride of a woman who had always believed beautiful things were her birthright. She had no idea she was a guest in her own story. 11:59. I looked at the clock, then at the house, then back at the clock. 60 seconds. I thought about Leo. He was back at the apartment, asleep or pretending to be. He had stopped speaking to me 2 days ago. The silence between us thick, with a hurt I couldn't yet explain away. He thought I was broken. He thought I had surrendered. He thought the man who had built half this city had sat quietly, while a woman half his age walked away with the kingdom. Let him think that. I told myself. Just a little longer. 40 seconds. I thought about the document folded in my breast pocket. The waiver, her signature, that flourish, that careless, confident loop of a woman who signs things without reading them. I had touched it 100 times in the last 48 hours. The way you touch something you need to believe is real. 20 seconds. I thought about 1998, about a younger version of myself sitting at a desk at 3 in the morning, drafting trust documents by lamplight, building a trap I hoped I would never need to use, for a son who hadn't been born yet, against a threat I couldn't name, but somehow knew was coming. 10 seconds. I looked at Mr. Ryan, Henderson's car. The door opened. He stepped out. Dark suit, flat expression, thick envelope in one hand. He walked to the front gate with the unhurried pace of a man who has done this 1,000 times and feels nothing about doing it again. He pressed the intercom buzzer. Midnight. Inside, I imagined the sound cutting through the music, the deep, resonant gong of the front doorbell, the way it would ripple through the party like a stone dropped in still water. Heads turning, glasses lowering, Veronica frowning slightly, then smoothing it away, assuming it was a late arrival. Someone fabulous, someone worth interrupting the toast for. She would have walked to the door herself. That was Veronica. She always wanted to be the one who opened the door. She loved the entrance, loved being the first face people saw when they crossed into her world. She opened it expecting a gift. She found Mr. Henderson. Delivery for Veronica Clark. He said, flat, bored, completely indifferent to the champagne flute in her hand and the party noise behind her. Veronica laughed that bubbly, champagne loose laugh that meant she was performing for an audience she knew was watching. Oh, is it a singing telegram? Did my ex-husband send a farewell gift? She looked back at her guests with a bright, mocking smile. How tragic and adorable. Sign here, please. Mr. Henderson said, holding out the clipboard. She signed with a flourish. Veronica Clark, the lady of the manor, signing for her own destruction with the same pen she used for everything else. He handed her the envelope. He didn't say congratulations. He didn't say enjoy your evening. He turned and walked back into the darkness without a single word, the way professionals do when there is nothing left to say. Veronica closed the door. She stood beneath the $10,000 chandelier, holding the envelope, turning it over in her hands. It was heavy, official. The return address was a law firm she didn't recognize. Open it, someone called from the hallway. What is it? She tore it open. She pulled out the papers. The top page was not a greeting card. It was not a check. It was a legal notice printed on heavy bond paper, formal and precise and absolutely merciless, bearing the letterhead of the Leo Clark Future Trust. Notice of termination of ground lease and demand for immediate removal of improvements. She read it again. Slower. Termination. Removal. Improvements. The words didn't arrange themselves into anything that made sense. She owned the house. Harrison had signed the deed. She had the keys in her hand, and a party full of witnesses who had watched her unlock the front door herself. She flipped the page. Notice of delinquent ground rent and tax indemnification. Amount due immediately $742,000. She started to laugh. It began as a giggle, confused, disbelieving, and grew into something louder, almost hysterical. The way laughter sounds when the only alternative is screaming. "It's a joke," she announced, her voice carrying over the music. "Harrison is trying to be funny. Listen to this." She held the papers up dramatically. "He says I have to remove the improvements from the land." "The improvements? That means the house. He wants me to move the house." The room erupted. Laughter. Disbelief. The sound of people who are certain they are watching someone else's humiliation. "He thinks a piece of paper can scare me out of my own home," Veronica said, her voice rising with champagne-fueled defiance. "I have the deed. Harrison, I have the keys. You gave this to me. You signed it with your own hand." She looked at the papers one last time. A single line caught her eye pursuant to the terms of the 1998 trust agreement. Ownership of the physical structure does not convey ownership of the underlying real property, and for just one moment, one brief flicker of a second, something moved across her face. Not understanding. Not yet. Just the shadow of it. The cold draft that comes before the door blows open. She pushed it away. Winners don't get evicted. She grabbed the stack of papers with both hands and tore them in half. The sound cracked through the foyer like a gunshot. She threw the pieces into the air, and they fell around her like confetti, like snow, like the first quiet ash of something beginning to burn. "Turn the music up," she commanded. "Let's dance." And they did. Every one of them. They raised their glasses, and they danced on the torn pieces of paper scattered across my marble floor. They celebrated her defiance. They cheered her strength. None of them knew they were watching a woman dance on her own grave. From my truck, I watched the lights continue to blaze. I didn't need to see inside. I knew her. I had always known her. She would tear it up. She would perform outrage. She would pour another glass and refuse to let reality interrupt a perfectly good party. That was fine. Every minute she spent dancing was a minute she wasn't calling a lawyer. Every bottle she opened was another nail. By the time the hangover arrived, and it was coming, the kind that no amount of water or aspirin touches, it would be too late to file an injunction. Too late to claim fraud. Too late to stop what was already in motion. I put the truck in gear. I took one last look at the house. At the lights. At the life she thought she had claimed. Then I drove away into the dark. Toward a cramped apartment and a cold bed, and a son who thought his father had lost. I drove away smiling, because Veronica Clark had danced on her own eviction notice and called it a party. And tomorrow morning, when the music stopped and the guests went home and the champagne ran out and the silence came rushing in, reality was going to knock on that door again. And this time, it wasn't going to wait to be let in. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and consequence. It was the kind of room that had seen everything: fortunes divided, families dissolved, lives rewritten by a stranger in a black robe, with a gavel and 30 minutes on the docket. The ceiling was high and indifferent. The wood was dark and old. The air conditioning ran just cold enough to remind you that comfort was not the point. Veronica sat at the plaintiff's table looking like vengeance dressed in Chanel. Black dress. Perfect posture. Eyes sharp enough to cut glass. She had come here to finish me, to have a judge declare that the eviction notice was harassment. That I was a bitter old man weaponizing the legal system against a woman who had simply had the courage to leave. Richard Sterling sat beside her. His catalog smile, freshly polished. His briefcase thick with documents he was absolutely certain would end this in 20 minutes. I sat at the defendant's table with Sarah. No paralegal team. No towering stacks of files. Just Sarah. Her briefcase. And the battered gray metal box I had carried out of the apartment that morning. The same box Veronica had watched me pack without a second glance. Assuming it held tax receipts or old warranty manuals. She had never once asked what was inside it. That had always been her greatest flaw. Veronica only looked at what glittered. Judge Patterson entered, and the room rose. She was a compact woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain and the expression of someone who had long ago stopped being impressed by expensive lawyers. She sat. Visat. She opened the file. Mr. Sterling, she said, without looking up. You are alleging that the defendant has engaged in harassment by serving your client with fraudulent eviction notices for a property she legally owns. Is that correct? Richard rose smoothly, buttoning his jacket. That is correct. Your Honor, 3 days ago, Mr. Clark signed a binding settlement agreement transferring full ownership of the Malibu estate and the New York penthouse to my client. The signed deeds are right here. He walked to the bench and placed the documents before the judge with the confidence of a man laying down a royal flush. He gave her the keys. He walked away. And then, in what can only be described as an act of calculated emotional cruelty, he hired a process server to disrupt her housewarming party with documents claiming she has no legal right to be in her own home. It is harassment. Your Honor, it is the last desperate act of a man who cannot accept that he lost. Judge Patterson scanned the settlement agreement. Then she looked at me over her glasses. Mr. Clark, did you sign this document? I stood. My knees ached. I stood anyway. Yes, Your Honor. I said, I transferred ownership of the structure to my ex-wife. I gave her the house. Then what? Richard interrupted, unable to contain himself. Is the legal basis for serving her with an eviction notice. Because, I said, my voice rising just enough to fill the room, owning the house is not the same thing as owning the land it sits on. Silence. Richard frowned. A small, confused frown. The frown of a man who has just heard something that doesn't fit the shape of the world he thought he was standing in. That's absurd, he said. It's real estate. The land and the structure are inseparable. In most cases. I agreed. Not in this one. I opened the metal box. I took out the Phoenix Trust file, the manila folder worn soft at the edges, smelling of time and patience and 25 years of quiet preparation. I walked to the bench and placed it beside Richard's gleaming documents. The contrast was not accidental. Your Honor, in 1998, I severed the estate. I transferred the underlying land, the actual earth beneath the Malibu property and the New York building into an irrevocable trust, the Leo Clark Future Trust, established for the sole benefit of my son. Sarah rose and handed a copy to Richard. He took it. He began to read, and I watched the color leave his face slowly. The way color leaves a room when the sun goes behind a cloud, as the language on page 47. Section C. Paragraph 4 became impossible to misunderstand. The ground lease, I continued, contained a termination clause. If the structure was ever transferred to a party who was not a direct blood descendant of mine, the lease terminated automatically. At midnight, on the date of transfer, Veronica received the deed to the house. I said, she does not own the ground beneath it. She never did, because it was never mine to give. It belonged to the trust. It belonged to Leo. Judge Patterson removed her glasses. She looked at Richard Sterling with an expression that fell somewhere between pity and impatience. Mr. Sterling, she said quietly, did you conduct a title search on the underlying land before advising your client to sign the settlement agreement? The room held its breath. Richard opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He looked at the document in his hands. He looked at Veronica. He looked back at the judge. No, Your Honor, he whispered. 2 words that ended his career in this city. Judge Patterson set down her gavel and looked at Veronica directly for the first time. Ms. Clark, she said, you are the legal owner of the house. However, you have no legal right to occupy the land beneath it. As of midnight 2 nights ago, you are technically trespassing on private property owned by the Leo Clark Future Trust. Veronica stood up so fast, her chair scraped the floor like a scream. Trespassing. The word came out cracked. Disbelieving. It is my house. He gave it to me. I have the deed. You have the deed to the structure. Mom, Judge Patterson said, her voice carrying the flat finality of a door closing. The structure is parked on someone else's land, and that someone else has every legal right to ask you to move it. Move it. Veronica's voice climbed an octave. It is a $15 million mansion. How am I supposed to? That is not this court's concern. The gavel came down. Case dismissed. The harassment suit is baseless. The eviction notice stands. Mr. Sterling, I suggest you advise your client to negotiate with the landowner immediately. The room broke open with noise, murmurs. Movement. The rustle of papers and the scrape of chairs. Richard was already stuffing documents into his briefcase with shaking hands. His eyes averted. His mind clearly calculating the malpractice exposure he was walking into. Veronica stood frozen, a statue carved from ice and disbelief. And then Sarah moved. She walked around the table unhurried, deliberate, and stopped directly beside Veronica. She leaned down. Her lips were inches from Veronica's ear, and in a voice just loud enough for the right people to hear, she said 5 words. The land belongs to Leo. Veronica flinched as if she had been burned. She turned her head slowly. Her eyes found mine across the courtroom, and in them I saw the exact moment it all collapsed. Not just the house, not just the money, all of it. The plan, the party, the flourish of the pen, the 2 million, the waiver she had signed without trembling. She had sold her son, and her son owned the ground she was standing on. The tennis instructor Chad, bleached hair. Linensuit, purchased entirely with my money, had been sitting in the gallery watching the whole exchange. He had heard the numbers. $60,000 a month in ground rent, $700,000 in back taxes. He had done the arithmetic the way men like him always do, quickly, quietly, without sentiment. He stood up. He smoothed his hair in the glass partition's reflection. He walked toward the exit. Chad, Veronica called out, her voice fracturing. Chad, where are you going? He didn't look back. I think I left my phone in the car, he said. The doors swung shut behind him, and Veronica Clark, who had walked into this courtroom as a conqueror, stood alone in the ruins of everything she had built on ground that was never hers. The husband she had betrayed was walking away. The son she had discarded owned the land beneath her. The lover she had bought had just remembered a phone call. The lawyer she had trusted was fleeing through a side door. The color drained from her face. Her knees buckled. She reached for the table and missed, and she fell. I watched her go down. I watched the black silk and the gold jewelry and the perfect posture crumple to the courtroom floor in a single breathless moment. The bailiff moved forward. Someone called for a medic. The room erupted around her. I didn't move toward her. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt something quieter and heavier than either of those things. The particular stillness that comes when a very long story finally reaches its last page. I turned away. I walked toward the doors, toward the hallway, toward the boy sitting on a bench outside with his headphones around his neck and his eyes full of questions I was finally ready to answer. The land belongs to Leo. 5 words, and every single one of them was true. The pizza was cold. The apartment was ugly. The view was still a dumpster. The air conditioner still rattled, like it was fighting for its life. But Leo was laughing. Not performing. Not pretending. Actually laughing, head back. Shoulders shaking. The kind of laugh that only lives in a chest that has finally put something down. He looked at me across the table, eyes wide, shaking his head slowly. 25 years. Dad, he said, you built that trap before I was even born. I picked up my can of Coke. I built it for you. I said, I just hoped I'd never need it. He picked up his can. He held it out across the table. To the ground beneath our feet. He said, I touched my can to his. To knowing who owns it. The sound was small, tinny, nothing like crystal champagne. It was the best sound I had ever heard. Veronica got the house. She just didn't get the ground. And in the end, that was everything. If this story hit different, hit that like button. Subscribe and turn on notifications because justice always has a next chapter. And drop a comment below. Would you have waited 25 years to spring the trap? Or would you have fought back the moment that envelope landed on your plate?